years ago. So as we start out here, you'll notice the Savannah River running next to us here. It comes down from up north, goes all the way out to the ocean, and just before it gets there, it splinters off into a bunch of tributaries, kind of like a spider's web. One of these tributaries goes by the sleepy little town of Pinpoint, where our first story of the evening takes place. Now, there are good days, there are bad days. There's one day in particular that's known as being a bad luck day. And that, of course, is Friday the 13th. It was Friday the 13th of May, 1932, which was a particularly unlucky day for Catherine Delancey. Memory of her death is kept alive in an old blues song. The lyrics go something like, on the 13th day of May, you could hear old Bocat say, get my deed and policy, turn it into ashes way. Ain't it a shame how Bocat done his wife? Well, this is 1932, the Great Depression. There's a lot of people out of work. Bocat Delancey comes up with an idea, a way to get some money, and that is to cash in the life insurance policy on his wife. There's just one big problem here, and that is, well, she's not dead yet. And this was back before computers, electronics, all of that. You had to have the actual policy to get your money. So somehow or other, Catherine gets wind of this plan and finds the policy, burns it up, turns it into ashes way, thinks this is the end of it. But it sends Bocat into a murderous rage. He kicks the door in, slams his fist into her, beats her into unconsciousness, puts her into a little rowboat, starts heading down the river here. Gets all the way out to a place called Hell's Gate Key, where she starts to stir. He sees this, grabs an oar, brings it down on her so hard it splits the oar and finishes the job. He puts her overboard. She washes out to a place called Raccoon Key, way out in Ossabaw Sound. And she's out there for a good while before she's discovered by some hunters. Well, they bring her back to Pinpoint, to the sweet field of Eden Church, and they hold services, sing songs of joy and sorrow, and remember Catherine Delancey. And on her grave, they take a vase and a water pitcher that belonged to Catherine. They broke these items, put them on her grave. This was all part of the belief that by breaking these items, it was sort of a way of cutting ties with this life and helping the person move on into the next. Everyone in Pinpoint knew Catherine never would rest in the grave because she was murdered on what they called the double bad luck day of Friday the 13th. Now, this area next to us here is known as the Trustees' Garden. It's one of the oldest sections of town. Some of the oldest buildings in the state are over here. And one of them, coming up around the corner here, is the Pirates House restaurant today. The building dates to the 1750s. It was the hangout of sailors, pirates, privateers. A lot of interesting characters were gathered here and drank and swapped stories of ocean-going adventures. It's also where Robert Louis Stevenson found inspiration for his 1880s novel Treasure Island. They say up there on the second floor, up there behind the flags, is where the inspiration for Captain Flint died, bellowing out his last commands of Darby, fetch out the rum. It's a nice restaurant today, but some people believe that Captain Flint is still in there, roaming the second floor, the old lodging rooms. Not too long ago, there was a bartender working there. On a break, he went upstairs to look around, kind of explore the old building. And as he stood there admiring this ornately carved mantelpiece, he heard this gravelly voice behind him whisper, "More rum." He turned and looked, there's this old decrepit sailor sitting in the corner there, clutching a tankard. The old man reached out with his cup. He whispered, "More rum." With that whisper right in front of the bartender there, he just disappeared. Well, that guy apparently never went back to work there again, but some people believe that Captain Flint is still in there, roaming the old Pirates House restaurant. Now, the year 1820 was a terrible year for Savannah. It started with a fire in January, which destroyed almost 2/3 of the city. And this was followed by a yellow fever outbreak, which would kill 1/10 of the population. There's a lot of death and a lot of destruction. One thing that was created were a bunch of orphans, and they had to go somewhere. The boys, they were sent out to Bethesda, which is still out there today. The girls, they came up here. You'll see this green building with the black shutters on the corner here. This was the orphanage on Green Square. This is where the girls came to live. And they had a place to live. They had food. They had clothing. They had a nice square to play in. So all in all, it was a pretty comfortable life for them. Until 1827, when a fire broke out. it spreading through the building. Y'all know when a fire breaks out, what do? You get out to safety, to the square here maybe, which most of the girls did. Two of the little girls, however, ran upstairs to the attic. No one's really sure why. They panicked, thought they would be safe up there. But of course, in a fire, the heat rises, the smoke rises, the attic filled up with smoke. Now, at the same time, there's all kind of people out here running around, fighting the fire, looking for loved ones. There's all sorts of noise, confusion, commotion out here. And with all of this going on, no one heard those two little girls up in the attic crying out for help. Now, as we go around again, you want to look way up at the top of the building up there. You see that single window. That's the window to the attic where the little girls ran. You can say you come through here, look up at that window, and every so often you'll see little handprints on the glass up there, as if those two little girls were still up there, still crying out for help. Now, in the 1850s, Mr. William Kehoe came here to Savannah as a young boy with his family from Ireland. They were very poor. They didn't have much, but they did have a strong work ethic. And when William Kehoe grew up, he went to work in the iron business at the Phoenix Iron Works. He worked hard, saved his money, and one day he was able to buy the iron works. Of course, he renamed it the Kehoe Iron Works. Time went by, he wanted a nice home for his family to live in, so he built a house, which was a little bit more than the family home. It was sort of a demonstration model. The columns out front, the trim around the windows, all made out of iron. Today the house is a very nice bed and breakfast, but current owners don't care a whole lot for our sound system. So I'll have to do this the old-fashioned way here for a minute. House is coming up on the corner here behind me. It's the Kehoe House today. Very nice bed and breakfast, very nice place to stay. So nice, in fact, that if it was your home, you might not want to leave, and that seems to be the case with Mrs. Kehoe. When she passed away, they held her wake over to the left there in the front parlor. And afterwards, she was brought out the front door, down those steps to the street, where they put her not into the really nice carriage that she wanted. The family got an old cart from the ironworks and brought it up here. And as the mule pulled it down the street here, all the pallbearers said they saw a plume of smoke rise up and snake its way back into the house. And of course, everyone said this was Mrs. Kehoe, saying she wasn't about to be caught dead in that contraption.
That is true.
They believe she's still in there, keeping an eye on the old family home, especially on the second floor. A lot of people say they hear footsteps up and down an empty hallway, especially in room 201 and 203. People say they feel the sensation of someone sitting at the foot of their bed or on the edge of their bed. They believe it's Mrs. Kehoe in there, still keeping an eye on her old family home. Up around the corner here, this yellow brick building is 210 East State Street. It's an apartment building today. A few years ago, one of the apartments was rented by a man and a woman who were kind of unusual. He was from England, she was from Savannah. Weird thing was, neither one of them liked tea. When they moved into their new apartment, they got settled in, and every so often in the morning, they would go into the kitchen and find a teacup sitting on the table. They asked around, no one seemed to know anything. It kept happening. So eventually they called up the last owner of the apartment, a fellow by the name of Rodney, asked if he knew anything about this. And he said, well, I really like that apartment. I hated to leave it. Kind of had to, though. My mother wouldn't leave. Seems when he was living there, his mother came to visit. And one morning she was sitting there at the kitchen table drinking a cup of tea when she felt a tingling in her arm. And that was about it. She died of a stroke right there at the kitchen table. Well, the two new owners aren't exactly thrilled to hear this. They try to figure out what to do and eventually get an idea. They decide to write a note. They get a pen and a piece of paper, and on there they put, Rodney no longer lives here, but if you'd like to get in touch with him, here's his current address. And this actually worked. Up ahead of us, this is known as Wright Square today. It was once called the Hanging Square, though, because right on the edge of the square, about where the one-way sign is today, that's where the gallows once stood. These were the gallows built back in 1734 for Alice Riley. Alice came here not long after the city was founded as an indentured servant. When she got here, they sent her across the river over there to Hutchinson Island, which was a small cattle community was sent over there to look after the man in charge, an old man by the name of William Wise. And one of her jobs working there was to wash the man's long white hair. Also working over there was another servant, kind of a big burly guy by the name of Richard White, who's in charge of the cattle. And time goes by, and I guess Alice and Richard decide they'd had enough of old man Wise. One day Alice is washing the man's hair. Richard comes in, he puts his knee on the man's chest, grabs the kerchief he always wore around his throat, pulled it tight, strangled him till he passed out. It was actually Alice that grabbed the man's hair, pulled his head down into the dirty wash water and drowned him. Well, they ran off, but there was really nowhere they could go. They were caught pretty quickly, brought back over here and put on trial, where to everyone's chagrin, I guess, Alice pleads that she's with child. They wait and see, and sure enough, she gives birth to a child, a son. She's allowed to keep him for only 2 weeks, and then he's taken away, and she's brought back out here to the square. Right over there, marched up the steps, still proclaiming her innocence. The ropes put around her neck, levers pulled, and she drops to a pretty quick death. Well, Richard, on the other hand, apparently wasn't quite so lucky. Back then, when they hanged you, they would put the knot behind your left ear. The idea was to break your neck so you could die quickly, wouldn't suffer. Unfortunately, it wasn't always successful, and Richard was one of those unlucky few. By all accounts, he hung out here for a day or so, since, after all, was hanged by the neck until dead. Now, that was a hanging. Certainly not a pleasant affair, but it was a legal affair, which meant there were steps and procedures to follow. There was kind of an order to it. A lynching, on the other hand, was a much more violent, chaotic affair driven by rage, by greed, by envy. And in the spring of 1860, a scandal rocked the city of Savannah. Wealthy socialite Matilda Sorrell was found dead in the courtyard of her house. This was 1860. She was planning a big party. It was supposed to be a diversion, a distraction from all the talks of war going on all around town in those days. It's going to be a big event. She had a lot to do to get ready. So to help her out, she enlisted her friend and confidant, a patient slave by the name of Molly. And Molly, I guess you could say, was Matilda's favorite. Molly, you could also say, was Francis's favorite. Francis was Matilda's husband, a wealthy commissions merchant here in Savannah. This wasn't unheard of in those days, of prominent men to have a mistress. If things were kept out of sight, out of mind, they tended to be overlooked. But on this particular day, Matilda's got all kind of things to do. She can't find Molly anywhere. Thinks maybe she's across the way in the carriage house in her quarters. So she goes across the courtyard into the carriage house, where she finds Molly and Francis together. Well, it's one thing to know of an affair, it's another to have it right there in front of you. And she's shocked, stunned, humiliated. She turns around and heads back to the main house. Goes inside, up the stairs, all the way up to the top floor to the main bedroom there. Walks across the room, steps out onto the ledge, looks down, draws her last breath, and then jumps to her death to the courtyard below. In 2005, the TAPS crew came to Savannah. TAPS is the Atlantic Paranormal Society. The ghost hunters as they're known. And they did an investigation at the Sorrell Whitney House. They recorded a number of interesting, we might even say sinister things. One thing they recorded, though, was an EVP, or electronic voice phenomenon. They came in and set up microphones throughout the whole building. They hit record, and then they left. Came back a while later, took what they recorded, were able to edit this. Well, we actually have one of the recordings we're going to play for you in just a minute here. It was recorded in back of the house, in the carriage house. Keep in mind there was nobody in the building at the time. They just recorded the ambient noise. So this is the house coming up on the right over here. Right next to this alley is the carriage house where this recording was made. And then in front of that's the courtyard where Matilda fell to her death. And then the main building ahead of that. So we'll play this EVP for you here. People hear different things in there. People hear help, get out. Some people say they hear the name Francis in there. Now, no one can really say for sure. Some people believe they recorded the voice of Molly, the Haitian slave, over 140 years after her death. She came to something of a tragic end herself, not long after Matilda's suicide. Someone came into the carriage house late one night. Molly was dragged out of bed. A rope was put around her neck, and she was lynched back there in the carriage house. Well, at the time, there wasn't much of an investigation done. No one knows who did it or why. About all that can really be said for sure is the Sorrell Whitney House was cursed by an adulterous affair, tragic suicide, and a terrible lynching, all in the spring of 1860. Now, as we head down the road, we're going to move ahead about 20 years in time to the 1880s. We'll be going by Mr. Samuel Hamilton's house. And his home has the distinction of being the first house here in Savannah to have electric lighting. Pretty good-sized crowd gathered out front that first night. A lot of people wanted to see the lights turn on for the first time. And I guess some of these people expected the house to blow up or catch on fire or something, which fortunately didn't happen. But they were another prominent family here in the city. They would host big parties and invite all sorts of important people and dignitaries. Gave them a chance to show off their big fancy house with the new electric lighting, which no one else in town had at the time. Now, the house today is another nice place to stay. It's the Hamilton Turner Inn coming up on the corner down here. And as we go by in front, you can look in through the front windows and see the front parlors. Imagine these big parties they would host with all these important people. And also, when we turn, you want to look way up at the top of the building. You see what's called a mansard roof up there. And that's where the children would go while these parties were going on, so they would be out of the way, wouldn't bother all the important guests downstairs. They had things to do, they had games to play, things to keep them busy. They apparently had a billiards table up there. One day they discovered that if a ball jumped off the table and went bouncing down the stairs, that gave them an excuse to sneak down and look around, see all the interesting people while they retrieved the ball. That was a pretty good plan. It worked pretty well until one night when someone got hit in the head and required stitches. And Mr. Hamilton put an end to that practice shortly thereafter. Now, for those of you familiar with Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, you remember the character of Mandy, whose real name was Nancy Hillis. And she lived in the building for about 7 years. It was a boarding house for a long time. And she and other people staying there, they said every so often they would hear laughing and giggling up at the top of the stairs. But once in a while, out of nowhere, they'd hear a thump, 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 thump going down the steps. And this was all at a time when there were no children living there. Except possibly some of the Hamilton children were still in there, still trying to sneak down and catch a glimpse of all those interesting partygoers. People here in Savannah have come to know it as a place where the children are heard and not seen. Coming up next is our first stop along the tour route tonight. Like I said, this is a ghost tour, and no ghost tour would really be complete without a visit to a graveyard. So coming up next, we'll be stopping by the Colonial Park Cemetery. Kind of an interesting place. Dates back to the 1700s, the Revolutionary War days. And we'll stop and get out and take a closer look at it. And they do lock the cemeteries up at night, so we won't actually be able to go inside, but we will stop and get out and take a closer look at it. It's kind of an interesting place. It's open during the day. You might come back and look around on your own. There's some interesting things to find in there. It dates from the Revolutionary War days, and you can find the grave of Buttonwood Ned. He's buried in here. He's one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence from the state of Georgia. So there's some interesting things to see in here. Well, we'll stop here in just a second, and we'll get out and gather on the sidewalk over here next to the trolley, and you can take a little closer look at the cemetery. I'll tell you a little bit more about it once we stop up here. Go ahead, gather around, make a little semicircle here. Kind of scoot in just in case someone comes by, they can get by behind us there. Everybody? Okay, back behind me here, this is the Colonial Park Cemetery. Today it's the second cemetery used here in Savannah. This was in use from 1750 until 1853, and some people think of this as kind of a snapshot of the history of Savannah. There's some interesting stories written on these headstones. Right over here you can find the grave of Anne Garrard. On there you can read how she was a sincere Christian. She died shortly after giving birth to her 15th child. She was 41 years old. Not too far away down here's the grave of Susanna Gray. On there it tells how she died by the will of God, being killed by lightning. So there's some interesting stories in here, but now if you have the time, the inclination to go around and count all the grave markers in here, you'd come up with about 600 graves. In reality, there's over 10,000, some people say more like 15,000 people actually buried here. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Now they also say that Savannah's a city built upon the dead, and that's literally true in a few places. And yes, this is one of those places. Back years ago, the cemetery was a little bit bigger. On this side, it actually extended out into where the street is today. So yes, as we stand here this evening, you're standing on dead people. They're still there, buried right below your feet, all along the sidewalk here. Now here in Colonial Park, we also have these brick buildings scattered around. These are crypts. These are unique to Savannah and to Charleston. And unlike New Orleans, they actually go underground, about 8 or 10 feet or so. Look down at the bottom there, you can kind of see a half moon shape down at the very bottom there. It's kind of hard to see at night. That's actually the very top of the door. So if you were to dig down right in front of that, eventually you would hit an old staircase going down to a now bricked up doorway. And if you could go through there, you'd be in a little room that had 3 shelves on this side, 3 shelves on this side, and a big limestone, what they call ossuary or bone box in the middle there. And the way these things worked, when someone passed away, they would wrap the person in linen, put them on the shelf there. They didn't use coffins as much back then. They would just wrap the dead in linen, put them on a shelf. And I guess you could call it a way of recycling, too. When things filled up, they'd move the old bones to the bone box there, and that gave you a free shelf for the recently departed. Something of a grim practice, I guess, but they say there's a romantic side to it. If you think of a family united, even after death, for all eternity, that sort of thing. As long as they can rest in peace, that is. Now, in 1864, General Sherman came to town. He ended his march to the sea here in Savannah. He showed up with over 60,000 troops, which at the time was more than twice the population of the entire city. And of course, all these guys, they had to go somewhere. So all the squares, parks, basically all the open spaces were turned into campsites for the soldiers. And the cemetery here was no exception. This is where the cavalry, some of the artillery were quartered while they were staying here. And these guys, they showed up in December of 1864, right in the middle of one of the coldest winters on record. And to keep warm, a lot of the soldiers, they actually broke into these crypts. They moved the bodies aside and slept down in there among the remains of the dead. Now these guys, they didn't have a whole lot to do while they were here. All the Confederates had moved on to South Carolina. There really wasn't any fighting going on around here at the time. So once order had kind of been established around here, there wasn't a whole lot for these guys to do. And when they got bored, they would go around and change the names and dates on the headstones in there.
That's just weird.
So today you can walk through there and kind of over in the middle there, you can find the grave of Captain Jonathan Cooper. And if you believe what's written there, the man lived to be 1,700 years old. So like I said, there's some interesting stories written on the headstones in here. But now when you think about it, those cemeteries tend not to be all that haunted. Unless you're a grave digger, a groundskeeper, something like that. No one really spends a whole lot of time in cemeteries. Ghosts, they usually hang out in places where they lived, where they died, spent time, have a connection. And you know, by the time you get here, your spirit's already been gone for some time. So in general, cemeteries tend not to be all that haunted, unless something tragic occurs. And that brings us to 1901 and Mr. Samuel Baker. So from here, let's get back aboard the trolley, and I'll continue on with Mr. Baker on there. birthplace, as it's known, the birthplace of Juliet Gordon Low, founder of the Girl Scouts of America. And she was born right here in Savannah in 1860 on, of all nights, Halloween. This story actually involves her parents, Willie and Nellie. They met at Yale University in 1853. Nellie slid down a banister, crashed into Willie, crushed his new hat, and it was love at first sight. Later said that she bowled him over and he never looked back. And they were together for years and years, very devoted to each other, even though it was kind of a weird situation. He was an officer with the Confederate Army. She had 3 brothers fighting on the Union side. People said if this wasn't enough to break them up, nothing was. Some said not even death. But they were together for years and years, very devoted to each other until 1910. And that's when Willie passed away. And it was sad, but he lived a long, full life. Nellie, she was crushed by this. She was very devoted to her husband. Actually, this was their home coming up on the corner over here. This is the Juliet Gordon Low birthplace today. It's a house museum. You can go through and take tours through there today. Kind of a Victorian-era mansion. This was their home, like I said, till 1910. That's when Willie passed away. And it was sad. He lived a long, full life, but after his death, from time to time, Nellie would kind of get sick, and the family would see this. They'd notice this. She'd actually scold him. She'd say, "Don't worry about me. When I die, I'm going to be with my husband." Kind of like she was looking forward to this. Well, time went by, as it always does. About 5 years went by. And then Nellie really got sick, and the family, they saw this and realized, she's getting up there in age. This is probably it. This is probably her time. Came together there, gathered at the house. Got to be a pretty good-sized crowd there in the room with Nellie. Got to be kind of close, kind of hot in there. Her daughter-in-law, Margaret, needed to get out, get some air, collect her thoughts. So she stepped out into the hallway for a few minutes. She's out there by herself. Looks up, sees none other than Willie come walking out of the bedroom wearing his favorite gray suit, go walking down the hall and down the stairs. Well, she told this to her husband. Of course, didn't believe her. He said, "You're overwrought, you're tired, you're imagining things." But she wouldn't hear it. She stuck to her story. And a little bit later, they go walking down the stairs. Down on the landing, they came across the family butler. And he's down there kind of worked up, kind of agitated about something. Before they could even ask him what was wrong, he said, "You'll never guess. You just saw Mr. Willie come walking down the stairs and go out the front door. He was wearing his favorite gray suit." Well, about the same time, all the people who'd been in the room with Nellie, they said that she had sat up in bed. Everyone said she had a very radiant look on her face, as if a young bride going to her groom on their wedding day. They saw her extend her arms out, and it was right after this that she passed away. It's kind of a sweet story. Not all ghost stories are dark and ghastly. Earlier I mentioned the year 1820. It was a terrible year for Savannah. It started with a fire, which actually started right down the street here on Franklin Square. It spread quickly. Before it was all over, it destroyed nearly every building from the city market area through Johnson Square. This was followed shortly after by a yellow fever outbreak, which would kill a tenth of the population. Almost 700 people succumbed to the devil's disease, as it was known. Yellow fever, it's a horrible thing. It's a terrible disease. But they did have treatments at the time. Treatments were available. If you can imagine putting leeches on your loved ones, cutting into their arm to drain off poison blood. And, well, when that didn't work, a nice big cup of tar and turpentine, that should have you up and around in no time. So treatments were available. The doctors really didn't know what was going on, what was causing the disease, what was spreading it. Their best guess was that it was sort of like a swamp gas, a miasma, as they called it, that it was emanating from pools of stagnant water. And to combat this, they would get big barrels full of tar, put them in the squares, light them on fire, and burn them in an effort to cleanse the air, to drive away the disease. course, it wasn't until almost 100 years later when Army Surgeon Walter Reed would be the one to discover it was the mosquito that was the actual culprit. And even today, with all our modern medicine and everything we have today, there still is no cure for yellow fever. Well, we're back down here on River Street, and we're quickly approaching our second stop along the tour, the old Perkins & Sons Chandlery, old turn-of-the-century warehouse, which would sell things for all the ships that would come into and out of the port here. They carry things like lumber, resin, sailcloth, rope, any and every type of material you would need to build, repair, and maintain the ocean-going vessels that would come into and out of the port. And the Perkins & Sons is kind of the final example of a once proud profession. Although it's definitely seen better days, it's kind of fallen into disrepair, kind of been abandoned over the years. There's still a lot of interesting things to see in there. Looks like we'll have a minute or two to kill here. Looks like the group ahead of us is still in there. Like I said, there's a lot of interesting things to see. There's a lot of old shipwreck salvage in there. So as soon as they clear out, we'll head on inside and there we go. Get a chance to go inside, look around. We'll be in there for a few minutes. We'll be coming back to the trolley afterwards, though, so if you'd like to leave something here, that's fine. You can stow it under your seat. Also, we would ask, just as a safety and a courtesy thing, no flash photography while we're in there. You're welcome to take pictures. We just ask no flash photography or videography. Well, while we wait, since it goes